The same issue for food, environment, health, because it's not a question of technology. The technology is there, and generics are very good products and very cheap, and vaccines are very cheap. The problem is social organization. So the first question is peace, and then it's economical growth, and the faculty of the people living in a country at a given point of time to have enough food to survive, the possibility to educate the children. The best indicator, even in France, of life expectancy at birth is, we did some work on that, is the level of education of the mother. Okay. That was shown in underdeveloped countries, but it's also true in France. So when you have a chance of having an educated mother, your life expectancy is good. But anyway.
The central point is, though, at a high level, these things aren't individual compartments, like health and food, and it's actually about the whole package.
You need a social organization. I'm working a lot now with from the Academy of Technology. I'm a member on telemedicine and all this sort of. The problem is not technology. Really, the problem is how do you have a social organization which enables you to use this technology? It's not the technology, because probably the most complex technology we have it in our pocket is a portable phone. so that's not the question. The question is social organization.
I think your point is fairly right. I think that you're right to say that. We could argue on one hand there is still upcoming technology, and we discussed about innovation already. So let's put that aside for a minute. And I would agree that the organization of the society is probably the key element to diffuse basic health availability and increase the life expectancy to all over the world to a significant extent. And your example about, mobile phone is quite a good one, because at the end of the day, when you go to India, and you realize clearly that there are more kids who have, or let's say, or teenagers who have a portable or a cell phone than they have been vaccinated. And it's not a question of cost, because the cost of this vaccine is definitely not higher than the cost of the cell phone. But the way the cell phone has been diffused has gone much further. It's back to the question of here a bit of public policy. Does the government organize itself in such a way that they want to vaccinate? Let's say the 25 million babies which are born every year in India. Or don't they care on that? And do your point on, the point of corruption as well is there in that respect. So I think that's clearly a good example, and this parallel is a good example, and this is valid in Africa to a certain extent as well. Cell phone technology is well spread in Africa as well.
I'm just thinking if this idea of a global health citizenship code or parameters could help address some of this. And the gentleman called Michel said, okay, how do we deal with this fractionation? And you said, of course, health has little to do with healthcare, but when we think of health, we spend most money in healthcare, while other would be more effective. And actually, it might be a tool to establish this health in all policies concept, which we had also, I guess it was with the Finnish presidency at some stage, where we said, okay, if you have something you want to measure, then it's a tool to align everybody towards working towards this, and then even the education minister can contribute to achieving the parameters. What I'm thinking is we would need to go beyond life expectancy, because the parameter in itself is too insensitive to short-term measures. So it only reacts pretty. It's super sensitive.
It's very sensitive. It's extremely sensitive.
Okay, I was okay. You know more about it, but I wonder if we can still have something more around it, because.
We have the heat wave. Life expectancy almost didn't increase in 2 or 3.
Yeah, now in France you were.
Okay. By 11 years the year after.
The question still is if you. The question still is, so is there a need for having a few more parameters in there? It could be vaccination, and a few others, and I still think productivity even of health system can be a good one because it measures progress. Because you said yes, okay, the results coming out of health system have very little to do with the amount of money you actually invest. This is the variation. So it could be an idea. I'm stuck of why WHO isn't actually having a better grip on this. That's your question, Stephen. And I know they are undergoing reform, and we might want to look if they get their own house in order, what the outcome is and what actually nation states are willing to agree upon. Because when I listen to the advisor to Margaret Chan, the main obstacle he sees himself for reform is actually that there is very little interest of the nations to give away the powers, and everything needs to discuss forward and backwards. So this is supposed to be a pretty long-standing, long-lasting process again.
Madam.
Susan Lioto, I consult for NGOs, and almost all of them are, in one way or the other, involved in health. So what I'm about to say is going to probably seem a little surprising. When we look at sort of the framework of the problem in terms of governance, the decision-making process, who's making what decisions, and what are the decisions that in fact need to be made. Second of all, how does accountability work? And third of all, what is the financial reality behind all of it? So your integrated proposal, or even sort of an international code. There are a lot of different axes of moving targets. I mean, one of them is who are all the different players. One of them are what are all the sort of the side issues, like, you know, you have cell phone verification now of generic drugs in Africa by codes on the pills, or you have all sorts of things that have, you know, education. You have things that are nothing to do with the actual health itself, but that are important and related to the outcome. So there are a lot of moving targets, and I'm a non-medical expert, but I just want to say I really appreciate Steve's comment about the G20, because in my very much NGO-focused world, the one common theme is that none of this can happen without governments. And so if you look at the Gates Foundation website, underneath the listing of 33 billion in assets, it very clearly says, but nothing can be solved without government funding. And Gavi is also government funding, by the way, as you all know. Similarly, Doctors Without Borders, and I have the privilege of co-chairing the U.S. National Advisory Board, in the U.S. just sent out a very, very powerful email to the U.S. Stakeholders saying, you all have to call your congressman, because President Obama's budget and PEPFAR money makes an enormous difference. Millions of lives will be at stake. Even though Doctors Without Borders doesn't take any government money, and they work completely independently, they are pushing. So I think, and there are a number of other areas where government, we've seen progress. So I think starting at the G20 and saying how to get it on the agenda is the really interesting question, because we can't solve all the different players and all the different peripheral issues all at once. But if we start with one that everyone seems to think absolutely matters, and we've seen other examples of successful working with governments, getting tobacco on the agenda, getting seatbelts on the agenda, getting certain vaccinations on the agenda, at least at the level of the U.S. So I'm wondering what you all think about how to construct an effort that's directed at the G20, saying we need to decide how we define health for purposes of their agenda, and how and why it needs to be on there, and aligning all the stakeholders initially around getting this on the G20 agenda. So aligning the NGOs and your companies that are very active and very engaged in a lot of positive ways around this first step. I'm wondering if you think that makes sense, or what your views are on that.
The only thing I can say, along with, I wouldn't like to be too pessimistic, but I must say that, as a matter of fact, before the, the short-term concerns has probably overwhelmed the rest, but I was asked now something like 1 year ago by the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as there were the news that France were going to lead the G20, what we could discuss on precisely we try to put on the agenda the question of counterfeit of drugs, on quality of drugs, along the point of Monsieur de Carvazoué. But actually, it never went through. It never went through because, I mean, quite a number of other type of priorities we all know came on top, and, you know, I mean, this was not really. So, I mean, still a long way to go, and the way, I mean, you know better than I do, but the way the G20 has developed in the recent time doesn't look like they really tackle the key issues of the world. I mean, well, some of the key issues of the world.
Yeah, well, I think that you're right about the French experience. Let me just tell you briefly about what we've been doing, because we've been working with Alain Juppé, the foreign minister, who we hosted in Australia in September. But we were too late in the year in the French cycle to, if you like, elevate the game. But Juppé is very keen and very supportive for what we're trying to do going forward. The Mexicans, of course, have the G20 now for a short period of time, and then the Russians, followed by Australia, by the way, then Turkey. What we've done is, this is just a sort of quick thumbnail, but the notion is to form an eminent persons group, not appointed by the governments, but appointed by itself. You know, and my organisation is called the Global Foundation, so it can. We heard about arrogance at lunchtime. We can be arrogant to take on anything we want. But Jim Wolfenson is very involved with that, the former president of the World Bank. And a number of other senior figures are very interested to be part of this, forming an eminent persons group that gives advice to the G20 leadership that helps to shape the agenda. So it doesn't just come from inside governments as an agenda, it comes from the global citizenry. It's such a simple idea that it might actually work. And it has the endorsement of, as I said, Foreign Minister Juppé in France, Barroso in the European Commission has endorsed it, my Prime Minister in Australia. Everyone we speak to about this idea as it gathers momentum is very attracted to it. And the notion is to say, if you have the 20 leaders, which is 80% of the world's GDP, meeting like this, don't waste it. Put the big issues on the table. And I personally think that they should move away from crisis management of, you know, last week's financial crisis or the Greek government collapses into what we need is a more 5-year horizon, a more strategic horizon, where the bigger issues, and I think health has to be part of that agenda, has to be part of an integrated agenda about, as you call it, social organisation. So I'm not pessimistic. I'm an Australian, so I have to be optimistic. I think that there are, and that's one way to help encourage it to happen, and there may be other ways as well. Maybe this organisation, the policy conference, building a dialogue and talking to WHO and others. But I guess my key point would be that these days, the things that are changing the world in policy terms are not generally coming from within governments, they're coming from outside, and governments are implementing. And I would not underestimate the power of ideas and citizenry and the power of private companies, particularly these two companies between them employ 240,000 people in the world. That's an enormous amount of leverage from just your employees alone. So I think there's a pathway about saying it's not on the agenda, we think it should be on the agenda, maybe we can propose it should be on the global governance agenda and the G20, and maybe we can work towards that.